The desert's bargain. The desert did not forgive mistakes. It stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast ocean of heat and silence where the sun ruled without mercy. The wind moved in slow, restless currents, lifting grains of sand that whispered across the earth like distant voices. There was no shelter here, no comfort, only endurance or surrender. Eliza Hart had long since stopped counting the hours. Her steps had grown uneven, her breath shallow and dry as the cracked ground beneath her boots. The once soft fabric of her dress clung to her skin, stiff with sweat and dust. Each movement felt heavier than the last, as though the desert itself was pulling her down, urging her to lie still and become part of it. She pressed forward anyway, because stopping meant dying. Fragments of memory flickered through her mind, blurred and fractured. The sharp crack of gunfire, horses screaming, the violent chaos that had torn through the wagon train without warning. She remembered reaching for Daniel, his voice calling her name, but the memory dissolved before she could hold on to it. Everything after that had become heat, fear, and running. And now, there was only the desert. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Even her voice had abandoned her. The sun burned overhead, relentless and unmoving. Her vision blurred at the edges, the horizon trembling like water that wasn't there. She stumbled, catching herself once, twice, before her strength finally gave way. Her knees struck the ground, sending a dull ache through her body. For a moment, she tried to rise, but her limbs refused. Eliza sank into the sand, her fingers curling weakly into its warmth. It felt almost comforting now, the heat no longer an enemy, but a quiet invitation to rest. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy beyond reason. So this was how it ended. Not with a scream or a struggle, but with silence. A shadow crossed over her. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, another illusion conjured by exhaustion. But the shadow remained, steady and solid, blocking the sun's unforgiving gaze. A presence followed, real, unmistakable. Eliza forced her eyes open. A man stood above her. He was tall, his figure outlined against the burning sky. His long, dark hair was bound into a braid that rested over one shoulder, and his expression was unreadable, calm, distant, as though he were carved from the very land beneath him. His clothing was simple but practical, marked by the patterns of a life shaped by survival. He did not speak. For a long moment, he simply watched her. Eliza's pulse stirred faintly, a fragile thread of awareness returning. Fear should have come with it, but she was too exhausted to feel anything fully. Her gaze shifted to the object in his hand, a water skin. Her throat tightened painfully. The man followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. Something passed through his eyes, hesitation, perhaps, or calculation. He crouched slowly, his movements deliberate, never breaking that steady, assessing stare. When he brought the water to her lips, Eliza did not question it. She drank. The liquid was warm, but it might as well have been life itself. It burned slightly as it went down, her body struggling to remember how to accept it. Still, she drank, each swallow pulling her further from the edge she had nearly slipped over. When the water was gone, she sagged back, her chest rising more steadily now. The man remained where he was, watching. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Why? He understood the question, even if it was incomplete. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and controlled, he spoke. You would have died. It was not kindness. It was a statement of fact. Eliza swallowed, her gaze searching his face. And now, a pause followed, long enough to matter. The wind shifted, carrying a faint chill beneath the heat, as if the world itself were waiting for his answer. I can take you with me, he said at last. Relief flickered through her, weak but undeniable. Then please, you will be under my protection, he continued, his tone unchanged. No one will harm you. Something in his voice made her hesitate. And in return, she asked, the question forming before she could stop it. His eyes held hers, steady and unyielding. You will be my wife. The words settled between them, heavy as stone. For a moment, Eliza thought she had misunderstood. But his expression did not change, did not soften or shift. There was no cruelty in it, no threat, but neither was there room for negotiation. It was a condition. Her heart stirred, weak but insistent. Daniel's face rose in her mind, his smile, his promise. They had been meant to build a life together, to leave the uncertainty of the frontier behind. He had reached for her in that final moment. But he was gone. The desert had taken him, just as it had nearly taken her. Eliza looked down at her trembling hands, at the thin layer of dust that clung to her skin. She could still feel the pull of the sand, the quiet promise of rest it had offered only moments ago. This man, this stranger, had pulled her back from that edge, but at a cost. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his once more. There was no urgency in him, no pressure. He would not force her. He would simply walk away, and she would die. The choice was not truly a choice at all. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, steadying what little strength she had left. When she opened them again, something within her had shifted. Not acceptance, but resolve. "I understand," she said, her voice fragile but clear. The man studied her for a moment longer, as if measuring the weight of her words. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Without another word, he rose and extended his hand. Eliza hesitated only a second before placing hers in it. His grip was firm, steady, real. As he pulled her to her feet, the desert seemed to stretch endlessly behind her, swallowing the last traces of the life she had known. Ahead lay something uncertain, unfamiliar, and bound by a promise she had never imagined making. Eliza did not look back. A marriage without love. The days that followed did not announce themselves with change. They passed quietly, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, by the slow rhythm of survival that governed everything in the Apache camp. Eliza Hart learned quickly that silence was a language of its own. The camp rested in a sheltered valley, hidden between jagged ridges that broke the wind and softened the desert's cruelty. There were no wasted movements here, no unnecessary words. Every action served a purpose: gathering water, preparing food, tending fires that burned low and steady through the night. She existed within it, but not yet as part of it. The first morning, she woke on a woven mat inside a modest shelter, the unfamiliar scent of smoke and earth lingering in the air. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then it returned all at once: the desert, the man, the condition she had accepted. Her chest tightened. Outside, the camp stirred to life. Figures moved with quiet efficiency, their presence both visible and distant, as though she stood behind an invisible barrier. No one approached her directly. No one spoke her name. She was seen, but not known. Tahuya stood apart from the others. She noticed him before he noticed her, his posture steady as he worked near the edge of the camp, repairing a length of worn leather. His movements were precise, practiced, as though shaped by years of repetition. There was no hesitation in him, no wasted effort. He did not look at her immediately. When he finally did, it was brief, a single glance, enough to acknowledge her presence. Then his attention returned to his work, as if nothing about her demanded urgency. It unsettled her more than scrutiny would have. Eliza stepped outside, the ground cool beneath her bare feet. For a moment, she stood uncertainly, unsure of what was expected of her. She had agreed to survive, but survival here came with rules she did not yet understand. An older woman approached her. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined not with weakness, but with experience. There was a quiet authority in the way she carried herself, a sense that she observed more than she revealed. "Nanta," the woman said, placing a hand lightly against her chest. Eliza hesitated before responding. "Eliza," Nanta nodded, as if confirming something already known. Without further explanation, she gestured for Eliza to follow. There was no resistance in the gesture, only expectation. Eliza followed. The tasks were simple, but unfamiliar. Gathering water from a narrow stream that wound through the valley. Grinding dried grain with steady, practiced motion. tending a small fire without letting it flare too high. Each movement required attention. Each mistake revealed her inexperience. But Nanta did not scold. She corrected with quiet patience, guiding rather than instructing. There was no warmth in it, but neither was there rejection. Eliza began to understand. This was how she would earn her place, not through words, but through action. Days passed, blending into one another. Tahuya remained distant, yet always present. He ensured she had what she needed: food, water, protection, but he did not demand more. There were no expectations forced upon her, no attempt to claim what she had promised beyond the agreement itself. It was not what she had feared, and that, somehow, made it more difficult. At night, the camp settled into stillness, the fire casting low, flickering shadows across the ground. Eliza often found herself awake, listening to the quiet sounds around her, the soft murmur of voices, the distant call of the wind beyond the valley. One evening, she stepped outside, drawn by the cool air. Tahuya sat near the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last light of day faded into darkness. He did not turn as she approached, but she knew he was aware of her. For a moment, she considered leaving. Instead, she sat a short distance away. The silence between them was not empty. It carried something unspoken, something neither of them seemed willing to break. "You did not have to stay," she said finally, her voice quiet against the vastness around them. Tahuya did not respond immediately. "You would have died," he said at last, repeating the same words he had spoken in the desert. Eliza exhaled softly. "That is not the same thing." This time, he turned slightly, his gaze shifting to her. There was no challenge in it, only a quiet acknowledgement. "You chose," he said. The words settled heavily in her chest. She had chosen. Not freely, not without consequence, but she had made the decision. And now, she lived within it. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where darkness had fully claimed the sky. Stars emerged one by one, distant and unreachable. "I was meant to marry someone else," she said, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. Tahuya's expression did not change, but something in his stillness deepened. "He is gone," she added, more firmly this time, as if convincing herself. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke through the air. Tahuya looked back toward the horizon. The desert takes many things. There was no comfort in the statement, but there was no cruelty either. Eliza studied him in the dim light, seeing not just the man who had given her a condition, but the one who had kept his word without demanding more than she could give. It unsettled her, because somewhere between survival and silence, something had begun to change. Not love, not yet, but something quieter, something more dangerous. Trust. She lowered her gaze, her hands resting loosely in her lap. For the first time since entering the camp, the weight of her choice felt different, not lighter, but more defined, more real, and far more complicated than she had allowed herself to believe. Neither of them spoke again, but as the night deepened around them, the distance between stranger and husband no longer felt quite as vast as it once had. The return of the past. The balance Eliza had begun to understand did not break all at once. It shifted. At first, the change was subtle, carried on the wind, sensed in the stillness of the camp. Conversations quieted more quickly than usual. Movements became sharper, more deliberate. Even the air felt different, as though something unseen had entered the valley and settled just beyond reach. Eliza noticed it in the way Tahuya stood. He was no longer at ease along the edges of the camp. His attention moved constantly, scanning the ridges that surrounded them, listening for sounds that did not belong. There was a tension in him now, quiet but unmistakable. Something was coming. By midday, the unease had spread to everyone. A figure appeared at the far end of the valley, emerging slowly from the narrow pass between the rocks. He was alone, his steps uneven, his body marked by exhaustion and injury. From a distance, he looked little more than a shadow against the light. But as he drew closer, Eliza felt something shift deep within her. Recognition. It struck without warning, sharp and disorienting. Her breath caught, her body going still as the shape of him became clearer. familiar in a way she had not allowed herself to remember. No, it could not be. The man stumbled forward, his strength nearly spent. He reached the edge of the camp before collapsing to one knee, his head bowed as he struggled to remain upright. Voices rose around him, cautious and controlled. Tahuya moved first. He approached with measured steps, his posture guarded but not aggressive. His gaze swept over the stranger, taking in every detail: the torn clothing, the dried blood, the exhaustion etched into every movement. Eliza could not move. Her heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, until it drowned out everything else. The man lifted his head, and the world shifted. Eliza, her name left his lips like a breath he had been holding for too long. Daniel Reeves was alive. The distance between past and present collapsed in an instant, leaving her suspended between them. She stepped forward before she realized what she was doing, her body moving on instinct rather than thought. Daniel. The word felt fragile, uncertain, as if speaking it too firmly might break the illusion. But he was real. His eyes found hers, filled with disbelief and something deeper: relief, fierce and unwavering. I thought, his voice faltered. I thought I lost you. The desert had not taken him. It had returned him. Eliza stopped a few steps away, her breath unsteady. She searched his face, tracing the familiar lines she had once known so well. He was thinner, worn by hardship, but he was undeniably the same man she had loved, the same man she had mourned. I thought you were gone, she said, her voice barely steady. I never stopped looking, Daniel replied. Not for a single day. The word struck something deep within her, something she had buried beneath survival and silence. For a moment, the camp around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing in the space between what had been and what now was. But they were not alone. Tahuya stood nearby, his presence quiet but absolute. He had said nothing, had not interrupted. Yet there was no mistaking the shift in the air as his gaze moved between them, taking in the exchange, the recognition, the undeniable connection that existed beyond explanation. He understood. Eliza felt it in the stillness that followed. Daniel's attention flickered to Tahuya then, his expression tightening slightly as awareness set in. He straightened, though the effort clearly cost him, and met Tahuya's gaze with cautious determination. Who are you? He asked. Tahuya did not answer immediately. Eliza is under my protection, he said at last, his voice steady. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Daniel's eyes returned to Eliza, confusion and concern shadowing his expression. What does that mean? Eliza hesitated. The truth stood between them, unavoidable and sharp. It means, her voice faltered, then steadied with effort. He saved my life. Daniel's gaze softened briefly, gratitude flickering through it. But it did not last. And now, he pressed. The question lingered, heavier than the desert heat. Eliza felt the weight of it settle over her, pressing against the fragile balance she had managed to maintain. She glanced toward Tahuya, but his expression offered nothing. No guidance, no demand. Only silence. I am with his people, she said carefully. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth. Daniel studied her, something uneasy forming behind his eyes. He looked again at Tahuya, then back to her, as though trying to understand a reality that did not fit with what he had expected to find. You don't belong here, he said, more firmly now. You belong with me. The certainty in his voice struck her with unexpected force. Once, those words would have been enough. Once, they would have defined everything. Now, they only deepened the fracture inside her. I thought you were dead, she said, her voice quieter this time. Everything changed. Then let it change back, Daniel insisted, taking a step closer. We can leave. We can go now. The simplicity of it felt almost unreal. Leave. Return. As if nothing had been altered by time, by loss, by the choices she had made to survive. Eliza's breath caught. She wanted to believe it, but something within her resisted. Tahuya had not moved. He stood as he had from the beginning, watching without interference, his presence steady and unyielding in its restraint. He would not stop her. That realization settled heavily in her chest. Daniel extended his hand, the gesture familiar, achingly so. "Come with me, Eliza." The space between them seemed to stretch, filled with everything she could not say. Her gaze shifted, almost involuntarily, toward Tahuya. He did not look away. In his silence, there was no demand, only the quiet acknowledgement that the choice was hers, and that he already understood more than she had spoken. Eliza turned back to Daniel, her heart caught between two truths that could not exist together. The word faltered on her lips. For the first time since the desert, she did not know how to move forward. And for the first time, survival was no longer the hardest choice she had to make. The cost to the heart. Morning came without mercy. The valley, once a place of quiet rhythm, now felt divided, its stillness sharpened by the weight of an unspoken decision. The fire burned lower than usual, its glow no longer comforting but watchful, as though it bore witness to something unresolved. Eliza had not slept. She sat just beyond the shelter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the pale line of the horizon. The sky shifted slowly from darkness to gray, then to the faintest hint of gold. It should have felt like a beginning. Instead, it felt like an ending waiting to happen. Daniel had not pressed her again after the night before. He had been given a place to rest, his injuries tended with quiet efficiency, but the distance between him and the camp remained absolute. He did not belong here, and yet, neither did the version of herself she had once been. Eliza exhaled slowly, steadying the storm within her. The past had returned, not as memory, but as something living and insistent. It stood before her now, asking to be chosen. And for the first time, she was no longer choosing between life and death. She was choosing between truths. Footsteps approached, soft but deliberate. She did not need to turn to know it was Tahuya. He stopped a short distance behind her, his presence steady, neither intruding nor retreating. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different now, not uncertain, but complete in its understanding. "You will leave with him," Tahuya said at last. It was not a question. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, the words settling over her like a weight she could not escape. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. Tahuya did not respond immediately. When he did, his tone remained calm, unchanged. "You believed he was gone." "I did," she said, turning slightly to face him. "I had no reason to think otherwise." His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "And now he is here." The simplicity of it left no room for avoidance. Eliza rose to her feet, the movement unsteady but purposeful. "You speak as if nothing has changed," she said, a trace of frustration breaking through her restraint. "But everything has." The question struck deeper than she expected. Everything, she wanted to say, but the word felt too broad, too easy. It did not capture the quiet, complicated truth that had taken root within her. "You did not force me," she said instead. "Not after that first moment. You could have treated me as less. But you didn't." His gaze did not shift. "You were under my protection." "That is not the same thing," she replied, her voice tightening. "You gave me space. You gave me time. You let me exist here without taking more than I could give." Tahuya remained silent. Eliza took a breath, steadying herself. "I told myself it was only survival, that none of it meant anything beyond that." Her gaze faltered for a moment before returning to his. But that was not true. Something in his expression shifted then, not visibly, but in a way she felt rather than saw. "You stayed," he said. "Yes," she answered, her voice soft but certain. "I stayed." The admission lingered between them, heavier than anything she had spoken before. Behind them, the camp had begun to stir. The quiet rhythm of life continued, indifferent to the choice she had yet to make. Eliza turned away, her gaze searching the distance. Daniel stood near the edge of the valley. He had risen early, his posture tense despite the healing of his wounds. His eyes were fixed on her, filled with expectation, with certainty. He did not doubt what she would choose. Once, she would not have doubted either. He stepped closer as she approached, his expression softening with relief. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Eliza stopped a few paces from him. "I haven't decided," she said. The smile faded. "What is there to decide?" Daniel asked, confusion sharpening his tone. "We've already lost enough time. We can leave this place behind. Start again. Start again." The words echoed in her mind, tempting in their simplicity. But nothing about this was simple. "I'm not the same person who left with the wagon train," she said carefully. Daniel frowned. "You don't have to be. We'll figure out together, just like we always planned." The certainty in his voice felt familiar, but no longer felt complete. Eliza glanced back toward the camp, her eyes finding Tahuya where he stood, watching from a distance. He had not moved closer. He had not intervened. He was giving her what he had always given her. A choice. Daniel followed her gaze, his expression tightening as understanding began to take shape. "What is he to you?" he asked, the question edged with something deeper than curiosity. Eliza hesitated. The truth was no longer something she could avoid. "He is my husband," she said. The words landed heavily between them. Daniel took a step back, disbelief flashing across his face. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's not. You don't mean that." "I do," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "It began as something else. Something I didn't choose freely, but did not stay that way." Silence fell. Daniel's gaze searched hers, as if trying to find the woman he had known within the one standing before him. "And what about us?" he asked, his voice lower now, unsteady. Eliza felt the weight of that question more than any other. "There was a time when you were my future," she said. "But that time is gone." The words were quiet, but they did not waver. Daniel's expression hardened, pain and disbelief intertwining. For a moment, it seemed he might argue, might fight for the certainty he had carried across the desert. But then something in her gaze stopped him. He saw the truth, and it was not one he could change. Without another word, he turned away. The distance between them grew with each step he took, until he became little more than a figure against the endless horizon, just as he had been before. Only this time, she did not follow. Eliza stood still, her chest tight with the weight of what she had done, what she had chosen. When she finally turned back, Tahuya was still there, waiting, not for her answer, but for her return. She walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached him, she did not speak immediately. There were no words that could undo what had passed, no way to reshape the truth she had faced. "I chose," she said at last. Tahuya studied her, his gaze steady. "I know," he replied. There was no triumph in his voice, no relief, only understanding, and something quieter, something that would take time to rebuild. Eliza lowered her gaze briefly before meeting his eyes again. The desert stretched beyond them, unchanged, indifferent to the choices made within it. But she was not the same, and neither was the life she had chosen to remain in. The cost of her heart had been paid. Now, she would have to live with it.